Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, Miranda, James, and myself sit down with Travis Baldree, and he is so much fun. You're really going to enjoy this one. Check out the show notes to this episode for links to his website and his work. You've got to check out Legends and Lattes. Very original. If you're into D&D and a little bit of fantasy, this is the book for you. Everyone that reads it loves it. A little reminder, if you have not rated the show, reviewed the show, please do so. Follow us, whatever you got to do. It really helps us out. We love to hear from you, so we'd really appreciate that. All right, Travis is waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Travis Baldree is an author, audiobook narrator, and video game designer. Travis wrote the hugely popular novel Legends and Lattes, which won the Astounding Award for Best New Writer in 2023. He also narrated the audiobook for which he was nominated for an Audio Award for Fantasy. He released a prequel titled Bookshops and Bone Dust in November 2023. Travis is also known for the video game Torchlight from 2009 and for narrating the audiobooks of the Cradle series by Will White, among dozens of other books. He's joining us today from Washington State. Travis, welcome to the bridge. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you here. I do kind of want to kick things off by just going back a couple months to a place called Balloch, north of Glasgow in Scotland, which is where Miranda and I serendipitously ran into you. I don't know, maybe that's not so much a coincidence. We were all in Glasgow anyway, but just so our listeners know here, we were walking through a small town called Balloch, north of Glasgow, and Miranda, who's a fan, says, "That's Travis Baldree. So let's go say hi." And we went over, and by the time we got over to the park where Travis was with your friend and writing partner, just picture this, Travis was on one of those little springy toy thingies on the park. I think you were having an ice cream there.
It was ice cream. Yeah, I was sitting on a little springy horse eating ice cream.
Yeah. Did you end up going to Les?
Yes, I did. I drove up there and kind of we walked around, went all down to the dock, took a lot of pictures of that church on the south side of town, which was really cool. Discovered somebody's backyard just absolutely crammed with garden gnomes and other gnome-like objects. Like, it was a little incongruous, actually. Everybody else was kind of very tidy and neat, and there's clearly adhering to the rules of Lus, but there was this one backyard, just gnomes edge to edge. And then afterward, headed south and found another castle to go to in the middle of some woods next to a stream, next to a bunch of sheep in a field. Just there. There's just castles everywhere. It was a day of castles.
Were there any characters in that castle?
That castle did not have dyslexic Gary in it. That's, I guess, a whole other story. That castle was totally vacant. It was a smaller castle. It was like a starter castle. But we drove to the end of this dirt lane, which did not have a place to turn around, and kind of parked right before a hill that dropped off into a lake, or not a lake, into a stream. And with just a couple of inches of clearance between some old rock walls, and got out and stumbled down this fence line because the map said there was a castle there. I feel like people just wander through these places. There's like spray paint on the walls and like old cans. It's like this is where, when I was a teen, you went over to some junky place under a bridge or, the abandoned lot. I think that teens in Scotland just go to castles because they just happen to be available.
Castles are the abandoned spaces in Scotland. They don't have abandoned malls.
Nope, just castles.
Can you tell our listeners about Dyslexic Gary?
Dyslexic Gary? It was in, we went to see the Kelpies, which is in Falkirk. And the Kelpies are these multi-story tall metal horse heads that I believe are in honor of the draft horses that used to pull boats up and down the canals. And they're really cool. And we went and saw those, and it was really neat, and we took pictures. And near that is the Falkirk Wheel, which is this, you can look it up and see a video of this thing operating. It's this vast, like, corkscrew mechanical device that moves boats vertically in a lock from one canal to another. And the boats go in like this water-filled trough that stays suspended in a hole punched through this mechanism. It's kind of wild to watch, and it just feels surreal that someone would need to build this. But we finished and we were going to go back to Glasgow. And I was like, we've got to see a castle. So I just put up, pulled up my phone and Googled castle, and there was a castle in Falkirk. So I said, we should just go see this, whatever it is, and called up a cab, got in the cab, and he figured out where we were going. And he said, there's no castle in Falkirk. What are you talking about? And he's like from Falkirk. He's like, there's not a castle here. But we said, yeah, we should just go anyway. So we drive and we end up in this neighborhood, just any old, it just very standard, suburbia. And he takes a left on a gravel road between two houses and starts going down this narrow lane. And there's trees all around. He's like, there's not a castle here. We're just gonna have to turn around. But we get to the end, and lo and behold, there is a castle. And there is chain strung between two poles in front of it, and a little cardboard sign that says a dozen eggs, £2, 50 pence. So he drops us off and leaves, and we're just standing at the end of this road in front of this half crumbled castle. And we start walking up to it, and there's a whole bunch of cars and camper vans parked in a big grass area next to it. And this dog comes up to us with a frisbee and wants us to play fetch. And we have no idea what's going on. And this lady comes out from behind the castle and says, "Are you here to see the blue pool?" And we had no idea what she was talking about. We're like, no, we just heard there was a castle here. And he says, and she's going on about the blue pool, which is at the end of the lane. And mentions that her uncle is around, and if he comes back, he can give us a tour of this castle. Well, her uncle does come back on like an ATV and agrees to give us a tour of the castle, and he has the thickest Scottish accent of anyone we have spoken to yet at that point. There's like no vowels in it at all. So we're maybe getting 50% of what he says. And he pulls out this giant ring of keys. There must be a dozen keys on this thing. It looks like it's for a haunted house. But there's only one door on the castle. So I don't know what all the keys are for. Anyway, he unlocks the door and he gives us a tour of this castle. And it used to be probably 4 stories tall. A lot of it's been, I'm going really long on this. A lot of it's really crumbled and it's been hit by cannons. And he gives us all of this history. It turns out he lives in the castle. And he's been renovating it for like 4 to 6 years. He introduces himself to us as dyslexic Gary. Promptly gets like a rack of deer antlers off the wall that's mounted, puts it behind his shoulders so he's got deer antlers, and he's just walking around showing us stuff. It was just so weird and friendly and bizarre. It was very charming. It was we just had an amazing day.
So this must make for good inspiration for writing then. Do you live off this kind of stuff?
I don't think I live off of anything that directly. I get the feeling that most of the stuff I end up writing about is just sort of dug up out of like a mental mulch pile of stuff that happened a long time ago that sort of molders down and synthesizes, and then you dig bits out of it. It doesn't feel as deliberate as that. Stuff just sort of smashes together, and then something will emerge from it. I wish it was as controlled for me as just going and grabbing some inspiration and saying, yeah, I'm going to write about that, because it would be way easier.
Kristen, do you want to tell us why you were in Scotland?
Well, we were all in Scotland for Worldcon. It was pretty neat. It was my second time in Scotland. It was really neat to be back and experience that. It was my first Worldcon, first Hugo Awards, and yeah, it was neat. It was not exactly what I expected, but
it was my first Worldcon too. I'd never been before. I'd never had any reason to go before, and my first time to Scotland as well. I want to go back now. It was like easily one of the friendliest countries I think I have visited, which was unexpected for me. I don't know why. Maybe it's like weird preconceived notions about the accent because it's kind of a slightly gruff accent, but everybody was just so nice.
Canadians are usually get the nice
right
moniker, but they were way nicer than we are. How did you enjoy Worldcon? It was your first one, but you had won the previous year.
Yeah, I got the Astounding Award the previous year. I didn't actually win a Hugo.
Yeah,
I don't think I count as a Hugo winner. I think the Astounding is sort of adjacent and just happens to show up at the same awards. So yeah, I didn't go to the Chengdu. I just mostly came to see people that I knew go to Scotland and to theoretically pass on the crown from the Astounding Award to the winner this year. So I attended almost nothing at Worldcon. I didn't sit in a single panel. I talked to my editor. I met up with people that I knew from Sweden and from the UK, and Canada. An author I know from Canada, and we kind of hung out and visited and toured around, and it was a great time. But I was kind of peripheral at Worldcon.
Travis, you have we have a ton to talk about with you and your background and everything that you've done, but we're here primarily to talk about your career as an author and Legends and Lattes. And it's the first book of yours that I read as well too. And in fact, I didn't read it. I This is one of the rare ones because I'm a product of my time, and I usually like to do, if not a full read, combined with the audio, I will just, go full on read. But I went full audio on this one, and I have to confess, I didn't know that you were a professional narrator and and a book reader as well too. And so I was kind of blown away at first by the quality of this author's reading. But then we got
It
into
feels
the
like
book.
cheating.
It's a little bit like cheating, but I think you've earned it, so I'll give it to you. But and I will admit too, being a product of my time, I'm sort of an old school fantasy fan,
Mhm.
grew up back in the day and played D&D, and and I'm playing it again, funny enough, 40 years later. And which is another question for later on. And when I first heard about this thing of cozy fantasy, I thought, what the heck is that? And then I saw the tagline and of, high fantasy and low stakes, and I thought, well, that's very clever. And then I got into the book, and I will say this is not a review episode. We should do a review episode of Legends and Lattes, but I found it immensely charming right away. It sucked me in almost immediately. Um, but then I realized that the stakes really aren't that low. It's a clever
No,
tagline, but the stakes, especially for someone like me, I can relate to Viv, your main character, very much in that being in that place of needing to reinvent and find another path and go to your second act. So can you talk a little bit about that, about and we should, without giving spoilers away, Viv is a an orc who is a warrior, but she's looking to make a change. And what was your inspiration for that with that character?
I'll tell you what I thought my inspiration was and then what it ended up being. So initially the book was a joke. It was it's the middle of COVID. I really just wanted to read something nice. I very occasionally get to narrate like a fantasy romance, and it's really kind of wholesome to read. Everything turns out fine. There's not that many characters, and you feel good after you're done. And I was in the middle of narrating something else with, big stakes, and probably a snarky protagonist. And I was like, you know what I really want is just a Hallmark movie set in the Forgotten Realms. And that was the genesis of the idea, which sounds like a joke. Um, and the original pitch was actually it was going to be a dwarf. It was like a dwarf that had to go back and save her dad's failing mine. She was from a big city, very successful, and all the denizens of the mining town are all quirky and weird, and she's very annoyed. And then she's won over by the hometown charm and some guy with a sweater and cookies or something. That was like, that's what the story should be. But National Novel Writing Month rolled around, and I was like, well, I'll do something like that. But I'm going to do a character that is as far from what I normally get to narrate as possible, and is as far from what you would expect in the role as possible, and have her open a coffee shop. And it'll be the same general idea, oh, it's a Hallmark fantasy. Um, and I went ahead and outlined it. And I still thought, even after outlining the whole book in detail, it was probably going to be a little bit of a nod and a wink to the camera, like maybe it'll be orc bucks or something. It's that kind of, you can see how it would be very self-aware and break the fourth wall. And then it just didn't. Um, and as I wrote it, I was just writing it in earnest. I just treated the characters like characters. And about I don't know how, maybe a quarter or halfway through, I realized that it was a book about somebody in their 40s who has been doing the same job for their whole life, discovers that that's not in them anymore, moves to another town, joins a new industry, and then discovers this community that they really didn't know that they needed, but that is just now essential to them. And I'm writing this as someone who made video games into their 40s, decided they didn't like it, moved to another town, joined a new industry, and discovered this incredibly supportive and diverse community of book people and narrators, and that it was totally essential to me. So it felt really, so I didn't think I was inspired by what life is for me, but I clearly was. And so now you guess you have both halves of that.
Well, and I think the way it was done as well too is so smart because it's very the coffee shop idea is so relatable and so delightful to so many of us and essential. But that change that she goes through as well, anyone who's been through a divorce or, a change of career, as we've been discussing, I think could relate really strongly to this. So I think it was a very smart direction. And how did your other characters that populate the novel? A lot of them are plays on those, turnaround on the, typical monster tropes, a succubus and a orc
Mhm.
and a hobgoblin, and it's that sort of turning around of those stereotypes seems to be, you're part of a bit of a zeitgeist, I think, with that these days. Even things like the big game D&D is doing a lot of that, where
Yeah,
monsters aren't so much monsters
monsters
anymore. Not
anymore. Yeah, they're just
not
people.
necessarily. Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but nonviolent solutions are an option now as well too. And can you speak to that? Why did you want to be part of that?
Um, so there's probably a couple points on the characters. Several of the characters were actually just started as coffee shop archetypes. You've got like the student that shows up and never pays for Wi-Fi and just gets a water just to do their homework. And, the local cat, and everyone knows its name, but nobody knows who owns it, but it's there all the time. And there's kind of people that I think you see in a coffee shop that are shown in some of those archetypal characters. Um, but also I just wanted everything in the book to basically be against type, to be something that wasn't what you would expect. You're opening a coffee shop in a horse stable. You've got an orc who's a small businesswoman. You've got a succubus who's basically ace. All of these things are just against basic expectation. Um, and that just felt nice to do. And it felt like all of them I feel like I like it when characters kind of thematically synergize with each other, that you can feel kind of like that resonance between the characters, because I think that also reinforces them understanding and liking each other. Because while they have very different goals and they're very different people, they have core things about them that resonate. My goal with it, and I just said it for myself at the outset, was that there wouldn't be any real violence past the first sentence. So the first sentence is like the closing page of like the previous action adventure book. In fact, both of the books, it starts with something incredibly violent. And then it doesn't do that anymore. I I guess there's a couple parts to this. One, for Viv, what I wanted her to be doing was heroic acts that didn't involve hurting anything. And so it's just a sequence of everyday kind of heroisms, moving somewhere else, starting a new venture, trusting people when you didn't trust them before, setting aside an old toxic way of dealing with something when it would work just fine and you know how to do it, but you don't want that to be part of who you are. And then ultimately, finding out if a friendship is something more. And those are all like brave things to do that don't involve anything dying. And you're talking about the fact that it's got the very misleading tagline, high fantasy, low stakes. They aren't low stakes. They're just smaller scale stakes. They don't expand to the world stage. Um, and I'm kind of exhausted of like the overblown CGI kind of stakes that you end up getting in a lot of books now. We always want to raise the stakes, but I feel like we only think of stakes in terms of survival and threat, destruction. Um, like it always bothers me when people don't like a prequel because they're like, well, we know everybody survives. I'm like, who cares? You no, don't read any book that starts just go to the last book in a series. You don't need to read the other ones because you know they're going to survive through the first 8. Why would you need to read that? Well, it's because of the stuff that happens, the stuff that matters. So I kind of rebel against that a little bit. And so I just wanted something where the stakes were ones that I actually could care about, because I actually don't care anymore about whether somebody kills a dragon or saves their country from the evil overlord. I can't relate to it at all. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't light up any of the lights in me anymore like it did when I was a kid, because that doesn't resonate. That doesn't say anything to me. You can do all of those things, but I would rather have something else involved. There has to be some other more human observation tangled up in those for me to care. So I wanted to write something that had that didn't seem like it had false stakes and that I could care about. And I didn't want to give up fantasy.
You get to go with Viv through her happily ever after. And
Yeah.
exposing a town to milky bean water is a special kind of magic too. But is that why you chose to do a prequel with your second book?
Um,
That...
so the prequel was actually unexpected. I was going to write a different second book. The first thing I said after I was done was like, well, I don't want to just write small business opening fantasy books for the rest of my life. That's for sure. So I'm going to do something totally different. So I was going to write a cozy mystery. It was basically fantasy murder she wrote. And I outlined it all and I had the mystery and everything. And I wrote like I don't know, quarter of it. And I hated it because apparently I just don't actually like mysteries that much. I just like all the people in the mysteries and I like the mystery vibes. But all of the work of planning the clues and making sure that you can discover them and doing all the mechanics of a mystery, I find exhausting and annoying. And it just squeezes all the characters out from me. So it just felt inert to me. I didn't like it. And I was horrified and I just restarted like 3 other times until I finally found a book I could write and figured out what I needed to make a book. Um, and I wanted to write about the things that happen, the mistakes that we make that aren't really mistakes. You know, the dead ends that we travel down that are actually really important to us, but we don't know until like a decade or 2 later how important that was for us. And so that was something I could write about, and it naturally just fit in with telling about Viv when she was younger, because I thought it would make those 2 books work well together, but they could still stand alone. So I just discovered that I could write that. So that's what I ended up doing. Harvesting all of the organs of the 3 dead books that came before. All the characters in the book came from the 3 failed books, which is nice. It wasn't totally wasted work.
I just wanted to touch on something you mentioned as well, Travis, about the resonance of these storylines and these new priorities or new stakes. Uh, what kind of feedback have you gotten from your readers? When people come to you at book signings or send you emails or notes, what's that resonant quality like for them? Are they feeling that same vibe as you, or what have you learned from them as well?
Uh, yes, and people respond to different things. But it's one of the most unexpected and cool things that I have found about writing a book that has something of you in it. You put your experience in, or a bunch of your experiences, honestly, the way you feel about things, and honestly, your perspective filters into what you're writing, and it's like putting, a message in a bottle and sending it out. Somebody's going to open it on the other end, and they're going to read it, and it's going to feel like that letter's for them or it isn't. Um, and when someone tells you that they had an experience that you had or something similar, it's just feels really, really powerful. It like annihilates loneliness. It's a way of connecting to other people that I didn't know I would get. Um, and ideally it's the same for them. It's like this two-way street of seeing each other, which is really profoundly cool. I don't want to like overplay this, but it's really, really neat. And it kind of highlighted for me what's really important to me in a book, in a way that I don't think I was consciously aware of before. That when I get that, that's a common thing in books that I take away with me, and that makes them stick with me afterward. So, um, I mean, there's absolutely people who don't get those things, who haven't shared those same experiences, so it's just not going to land for them. They're not gonna relate to that, and that's totally okay. Um, It's like if you wrote a letter to everybody in the world. You can write a really, really broad letter that everybody will understand, but nobody's going to resonate with it very deeply because it has to work for everybody. You can write an ultra specific letter that only works for one person, but oh my God, will they love it? Or you can choose some place in the middle where it's going to speak to some percentage of people, not everybody, because you just can't, but it will do it to at least enough depth that they remember it and they care about it. Which just feels like a nice spot to go for. I wish I could say that I would had done this consciously. I didn't, but it's like a retroactive observation.
That's such an amazing way to put it, Travis. That's really neat. The letter to the world.
That experience annihilates loneliness. What a an amazing way to describe that experience. Like yeah, I feel like that should be on the jacket of your next book. It's really because gosh, especially in the world today, I feel like
Right?
this could use that.
Connection is more subdued and more scarce than I think it's probably ever been. And we get some things out of that. I mean, I don't like responding to a phone call. I want a text. But what did I lose? What did I lose? Something important.
That kind of leads into what I was about to ask, which is if this book had come out 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, how would it be received? And what do you think has changed? What happened to for this to be the right time for this?
I mean, I think even if it had been 2 years prior, it wouldn't have necessarily done anything, or maybe 2 or 3 years later. I think that it just happened to hit a particular sweet spot of a couple of things. One, COVID exhaustion. The idea of seeing people without a mask in a coffee shop is like the height of escapist fantasy when this book comes out, right? Everybody's largely isolating. People have got masks on. You don't see people you know anymore, and everybody's exhausted of Zooms. Don't ever want to be on a Zoom again. Um, and at the same time, people are also socially watching things like Critical Role. Um, D&D is mainstream, and people are playing games of D&D where they're like, you know what, we just don't want to kill anybody today. We just want to go and open up an inn. Um, I can't say that I had any of that in mind. I think that just happened to be the landscape when I wrote this book, and it just was particularly a good time for it. Um, People just wanted to feel okay. And I mean, I definitely had that feeling at that time. I wrote it because I just wanted to feel okay. I was trying to feel like crap. I didn't want to watch the new Game of Thrones. I was like, no, I don't need anybody to be beheaded. I don't need maximum violence. I don't need to feel gross after an episode. In the service of drama, I just don't need it right now. There's nothing wrong with it, but oh my God, it's not the food I want to eat. And I think that enough people felt the same way that it happened to work out. Um, and just the landscape where I could even launch it as a self pub, and the stink is now off of self pub. There's tons of successful self pub authors. There aren't going to be any barriers to being released. I think it really was just a very much a nexus of opportunity that I accidentally landed in.
Yeah, it is a very interesting and specific nexus, and I know when my little gaming group of buddies a few years back, you know, we had started playing again after many years away, and then we were starting to become fathers, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, we would joke around that our game should actually be called B&B because that's what we were, which is probably not an original thought. I'm sure it's been said before, but that is, you know, oftentimes the loot that we'd be carrying was, you know, candlesticks and draperies and things like that. So it was it's an interesting thing. And I wanted to ask, have any of your fans mentioned that they've incorporated, you know, a Legends and Latte style cafe or setting in their home games?
Quite a few, some of them literally. Several people have sent me their character sheets. Um, so definitely, yeah.
And what does that do to your creative soul?
I mean, it's just it all. Anytime somebody is moved by experiencing something that you did or and responds with any effort beyond just having consumed it, it's amazing. I've gotten Lego sets where people make custom Legos and printed and have the instructions, and people send me art, and I got a crocheted thimble, and you know, it's it's kind of mind blowing. I couldn't possibly be more grateful and kind of blown away. And again, recognizing the entire time that it's largely a confluence of events that I don't feel like I really had any part in. So mostly I just feel fortunate.
I do like feel that you had a big part in it. I was one of those people that felt like, oh, this is the book that I've been looking for, because for years before Legends and Lattes was published, I always said that I wanted to read a book about just like a Hobbiton wedding planner. I didn't want anyone to go to war, and I don't want to watch any of the stuff, but I'd like to see what they're doing in the town. And that is exactly what you did. I don't think you had nothing to do with it.
I mean, one thing I said before is like if you can stand under storm clouds and you can wish for it to rain and fill up your bucket, but about the only thing you can do is make sure your bucket doesn't have any holes in it. So you can like try and do a good job at whatever you're doing, but I don't think you have a lot of control beyond that. And I say that having read and narrated the books of a lot of authors that make incredible books that I think are amazing, but they just don't happen to have landed at the right nexus of events. If they had, I feel like they would have just exploded and they just didn't land on the right ground, which is kind of frustrating and also humbling if yours did, because you realize how rare that is and how many people have written things that are exceptional, way beyond anything that you've done, that deserve to have found their audience and then didn't. I feel like this has existed in various forms for a while. I think Terry Pratchett kind of, with his very specific style of humor, covered this kind of from the British end of things. This is a fantasy world to talk about human stuff. We're not talking about wars. We're not talking about dragons. We're talking about, you know, what it's like to be Sam Vimes, and concepts of death and mortality, and talking about real stuff and using fantasy to do it. And you think about like 60 to 70% of the Studio Ghibli movies, which are like fantasy that is kind of affirming and warm, but it's not saccharine, right? It treads this middle ground where it can be a little sad, it can be a little wistful, but it's ultimately affirming. And there's something, and my God, the animation of the food. I feel like these things exist. And I don't know that I don't feel like I really pioneered anything at all. Maybe they're just slightly different bits off the shelf.
I think what you did, and I think that's a really astute and generous and humble description of your place in this. But I do think as well too, just the title, Legends and Lattes, and your high fantasy, low stakes tagline are really, um, I feel like you gave the readers or potential readers a key, and that it let them unlock that door because it is a really clear invitation.
I think it's a very, yeah, I think it is a, I think I did a good job of pitching it. I think that the combination of the cover, the title, the tagline, and the blurb are well executed to tell you exactly what you're going to get. And if you want that, you're probably going to get what you expected to get. Some people will maybe be disappointed or wanted something else, but by and large, I think it is what it says on the tin. Um, and I don't know how much of that is bleed over from all my time making games. Some of it is, and from that kind of production methodology and that sort of synergy of, I'm going to say, commerce and creativity, which I don't know. I mean, you can turn your nose up at it, but it is a specific skill that you can develop. Being able to, under time pressure, make something that is for you, but that also you're consciously trying to make sure appeals to this wedge of people.
I also wanted to touch on something that I mentioned early on, and that was your role. You know, you wrote the book, you created the characters, you got it out there, and then part two, or maybe part 10, I'm not sure what it was in your timeline, was narrating the audiobook. And,
Mhm.
fortunately for you, you have the skills clearly. And as I said earlier, it was a very pleasant surprise for me that you did. And your characterizations for each of your characters were so clear and so precise and so comfortable for me as the listener as well too. How much of a process was that? Did you hear their voices in your head as you were writing, or did you have to go through some iterations for some of the characters?
I mean, I absolutely heard them in my head while I was writing. Again, audiobook narration is kind of a bit of a cheat, because you get a couple of cool things up front when you start writing that I think a lot of authors don't benefit from. Some I think do, but um, I have a very developed interior voice because it's an essential skill of being a narrator. You just build it over time because narration is largely predictive. You're anticipating where a sentence is going to go. And so you have to know how it's going to sound before you begin to articulate it. And I can hear my voice extremely clearly in my head. And I probably have a jillion um, like character actor voices that I deploy that are just all kind of hung in a closet in my head that I understand intuitively that I know fit a feeling. So when I'm writing, I've already kind of cast it in my head. I know what everybody sounds like, which is extremely useful when writing dialogue. So it's all kind of done by the time it's time to read it. And it's the easiest narration I can ever do because there's no misinterpretation to be had. I know how everybody sounds. I know how everything's pronounced. I know where you should pause, and I know what the intent of every sentence is. So is again, it feels kind of like cheating. It's sort of effortless to do. It's very pleasant.
Do you have a favorite character that when they
Um,
come on the page, they were the most fun?
I find this really hard because what I like most is the group, is like how a group works together, because that's where dialogue lives, is multiple people communicating. And that's the parts that I like. It's not just somebody like talking by themselves. It's always somebody talking with someone else and how they work together. So I like the group. If I had to say Viv is basically me, so I don't ever want to say her. Everybody else likes Thimble, but he hardly said anything. I really like Cal because he's like the ideal of the kind of cranky uncle, the guy who will come over and like fix anything that's busted in your house and doesn't have embarrassing opinions at dinner. So I like Cal a lot, but I like them all kind of together. And my rule for myself is that if there's a character in the book, they should be able to sustain their own book. Like I should be able to want to write a book about them. So I would, you know, any of them are worth for me in my head for me writing a story about because I like them and they've got enough meat on the bone for me to do something with.
For the record, I would read a Cal spinoff
Right?
for sure. Yeah.
He does show up in book 3.
So are the same characters? Are you working on your third book, right? How many
Yeah, I'm a
more
little over
books?
halfway done. I'm a little over halfway done. Um, the third book. How much do you want to know?
As much as you are willing to tell me.
Well, it's called Broadswords and Bread Knives. It is not a book about baking. It's set a little bit after Legends and Lattes, and it's Fern's book. So if you've read Bookshops and Bone Dust, it's Fern's book. If you haven't read either of these books and you don't want any spoilers, I guess tune out now and skip slightly ahead. But at the end of Bookshops and Bone Dust, it kind of teases like, what would a future book be? Oh, wouldn't it be cute if Fern moved her business to Thune next door to Viv and they had this bookstore, coffee shop combo? Wouldn't that be amazing? Gosh, Fern would probably really get along well with Thimble. And that's just sort of the expectation, right? So that's exactly what happens. And within 3 chapters, it's done. And Fern hates it.
Oh,
She's kind of going along and uh, doesn't know what to do with herself. She's got ennui. Things are not working for her the way that she wants them to. She's doing all the stuff, but it just doesn't light up any of the lights. And so she agrees to do this because she's like, okay, well, maybe this is what I really need. I need to change where I am. I need to reconnect with people that are important to me, and maybe that'll fix what ails me. And it absolutely does not. A lot of the book is about the fear of disappointing people, the guilt of disappointing people you care about. So she does this. The books, they open a bookshop, they do it, it's a roaring success. And she's like, oh my God, I have to tell my friend that this is not working for me. And she's agonizing over it. And she gets drunk and she is going to drunkenly go over and make this confession in the middle of the night. But instead, she sees somebody she recognizes because in the prologue, she's saved by this very famous warrior named Asterix One Ear. She's a 1,000-year-old elf. She's been doing it forever. She's basically a hero running on inertia. She's just been doing the same thing for all eternity. And she sees her in town loading this wagon. And so she climbs into the back of the wagon and she's drunk and she's like, oh my God, this is a stupid idea. What am I doing? I'm going to get out. And then Asterix comes back and then she can't bring herself to do it and she falls asleep. So she wakes up 2 days later outside of town, staring into the face of a chaos goblin named Zill, who is bound up in hemp. And she's found out as a stowaway. And Asterix is taking this goblin who wears a coat that's made entirely out of pockets across the territory to turn her in for a bounty. But it's too far for Fern to go back to town, so she pretends to know how to speak goblin because the goblin does not speak territories. Um, Unfortunately, she fails to say that she only knows the swears. So she's convinces Asterix to carry her along to like the next crossroads so she can try and find a way to get home, while at the same time, not really sure if she wants to go home and writing these letters over and over to Viv, apologizing for fucking things up. And basically, it becomes a road movie, and there's Asterix has this sword named Nigel. His name is Nigellus Secundus, I think. And he's an elder blade, so he's a talking sword. But Zill has this bread knife, and his name is Bradley. His name is actual Bradley. His name is actually Bradellus Tertius, but he pissed off the blacksmith that forged him, and so he is now a great sword experiencing diminishment. Anyway, it's just this weird group of people. Zill is being hunted because the bounty hunter is huge by other bounty hunters. And then there's some other stuff going on. And so anyway, so it's a long road movie that has nothing to do with opening a business. And I don't know. We'll see if people think that's cozy enough.
That sounds excellent. And Fern is my favorite character. So I am very thrilled that she gets her to be the main point of view for the third book.
I feel determined that I have to upend the tea table now, that I have to immediately break out. The first word of the book is fuck. And it's just very explicitly taking the theoretical cozy ideal of what should happen and immediately blowing it up. And we'll see how people respond to that.
I think by book 3, you have readers that are, if they've made it to book 3 with you, feel safe that you're going to take them somewhere good.
I'm hoping it works out.
Is there anything that helps you with your writing process?
Not having too much to do. I've been kind of drowning in travel and audiobook recording and life for the past 9 months. And so it's hard to write regularly. I wrote some this morning, but normally I have enough time at the end of the day and I would write a chapter at the end of every day. And I haven't had the regularity that I had with any of the previous books. And it's been a very tumultuous year. So it's been a harder write. I'm confident I will get there. And I passed the midpoint. So
you've described your busy lifestyle, and we really appreciate you taking some time out to talk to us on the podcast.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And again, congratulations on the book and propping up and giving visibility to this sort of subgenre. It's something I wouldn't have expected that I would have enjoyed so much, and I really did. So well done.
Thank you. I would not have expected it either. If you had told me before that this was something that I would write, I would have said you were insane, because it just didn't sound like something I would write or that I would even want. And then it turned out that I did.
I'm so glad you wrote it, and I'm so glad that you came to speak to us, and it's been really a pleasure to hear you.
Thanks a lot. It's good to see you both again, too.
Yeah.
When I'm not on a little springy horse.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Travis, for being with us. That was a lot of fun. We hope you enjoyed this one. Lots to come on Tales from the Bridge. More chats with authors and filmmakers. More chats about books and film. We really appreciate you. Until next time.